Thank you for having me. My name's Sibone Salazar. I was born and raised in Boulder, Colorado. I work here now at the Center for Native American Indigenous Studies, and my tribal affiliations are from Taos Pueblo and Santa Ana Pueblo. My dad is Spanish from a small village up in northern New Mexico called Cuesta, and we have familial ties down in southern Colorado in Aguilar.
And you were born and raised here, but what made you pick CU?
Just that reason. I was born and raised here. I was born in beautiful Boulder, Colorado. My parents met here and decided to settle here. And, just fond memories of going to football games and loving the university. It's always been a piece of me.
And now you work here at the Center of Native American and Indigenous Studies, CNICE, right?
Mm-hmm.
Acronym?
Yep.
Could you tell us a little bit more about how it started, when it started, and kind of what the work you're doing now?
Yeah, so CNICE started in 2015. It was initially supposed to be a hub for Native American faculty to find research with one another, share research talks with each other, and recently it's turned more into a student services center, but also to spread awareness about Native American and Indigenous studies, what it is, how interdisciplinary it is, and a certificate for undergraduate and graduate studies has been made from it, as well as housing another program called First Peoples Worldwide, which advocate for Native peoples in shareholder advocacy and bringing them to the table to have a voice and to represent themselves to investors.
And you've been really passionate about creating space and giving Indigenous peoples a voice on campus. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Of course. We have one of the lowest populations here on campus. I think it's vital to encourage Native American students in high school to come seek higher education, to create awareness around the cultural differences, how we can help the success of every Native student in higher education, and recruit and retain them here at CU Boulder.
Recruit and retain, that's strong.
Mm-hmm.
How are y'all working to retain students here?
A lot of it comes from just mentorship, making sure they have a space at CNACE, making sure they know that we're here. Even if we're small in numbers, we're still here. There's still somebody that looks like you on campus, and making sure they know where they can get help. Right now, I don't think CU Boulder has a lot of those spaces on campus for Native American students, so this is just a start, but hopefully it'll be bigger.
And can you talk a little bit about the current challenges Indigenous students face and Indigenous peoples face in Colorado?
Yeah, this university is built on Native land. The Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Ute people were here. They're not here. They're separated by states, and that's the biggest contribution Native American peoples have given, not just this institution, but everyone who lives here in the United States of America. I don't think that's recognized a lot, and the histories and Native truths aren't as visible. It's not learned about, so I think just visibility and having that connection to this institution and knowing what the history is, what the histories are.
Can you talk about the importance of amplifying Indigenous people's stories and changing the narrative in media?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of diversity in Native American cultures. There's 574 tribes in America. That's all different customs, languages, cultural differences. And I think in media, you see one type of Indian a lot of times. And Native American Heritage Month is about kind of diversifying that and showing up, showing that you're proud and that there's many different cultures and customs in Native America and Indian country.
How do you celebrate your heritage in this month, in every month, but especially this one?
I think in education and educating myself about where I am, the land that I'm on, the people that I meet, and sharing that education with people who come by the center and just in everyday conversations like this one.
You talked about the land acknowledgement. Can you just state it again and the importance of why we say it and what we can do more to amplify it?
Yeah, it's honoring Native cultures. It's To me, like I said, speaking on Native truths, speaking to the history of Native American peoples here in this country, and reciprocity, right? Putting it back into Native American communities. This is Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Ute land in Boulder. There's 48 tribes that are historically linked to the state of Colorado. There's a reason they're not here right now. And we may not teach that in our elementary schools or in higher education. You do have to go seek that. But I think it's important to put into these communities, let them know that they're welcome here, let them know that they have representation in staff and faculty, in athletics, and that they belong at these higher institutions as well.
Thank you so much for your time. And my last question is, for allies, what advice would you give to them?
For allies, I would say come through the center, participate, come to our events, start building relationships with Native peoples, and advocating for Native students on campus.
My name is Mitch Fenton, and I'm an assistant lacrosse coach for the women's lacrosse team here at the University of Colorado.
And how long have you been in Colorado?
I've been in Colorado for 11 years now, so I started my undergrad in 2010 and graduated in 2014, and this will be my 8th year with the women's lacrosse team.
Let's go Buffs. Did you play lacrosse here?
I did, so I played for the men's club lacrosse team here from 2010 to 2014 national champions.
And how long have you played lacrosse?
I started playing lacrosse when I was in 3rd grade, so about 21 years at this point. Lacrosse has been a part of my life.
Ooh, lacrosse has been a part of your life probably longer than...
Longer than it hasn't been a part of my life, yeah.
Could you please give us the history of lacrosse?
Absolutely. So, excuse me, lacrosse was originally played in the St. Lawrence Valley, which is current day kind of the border between upstate New York and Canada, and was originally played by the Algonquin tribe, kind of in that upstate New York, southern Canada area. Originally played by the native tribes from those areas, and as it is described to us in current day, it is the creator's game. So the game of lacrosse was a gift from the creator to those tribes who first started playing the game. And they played it for a lot of different reasons, to prepare young men for war, toughen them up a little bit. They used it to settle intertribal disputes, and as a form of recreation. They would place wagers on the games, but at the end of the day, the game was played for the enjoyment of the creator. The game was given to them, and then they shared it amongst themselves, and really anyone who they came into contact with.
And why do you think this is important to highlight during Native American Heritage Month?
It's a really important thing to highlight. I think, just in the sense that the game was given to these native tribes, and then they made that decision to share the game with others. So it was, French Jesuit settlers in Canada in the late 1600s who were the first ones exposed to the game, because the native tribes up there wanted to share it. They wanted to, bring other people into this beautiful, beautiful game. And I think that's an important part of the game's history, that this game doesn't belong to any one person in particular. It was a game that was given to a group of people by their creator, and then shared with others. And it's an important thing to keep in mind as we go forward, that this game doesn't belong to anyone, and it is meant to be shared with anyone who is interested.
Great. Can you expand upon current challenges that Indigenous peoples face in lacrosse?
I think, not being a Native American myself, I think it's a difficult question for me to address too specifically, but through my own experiences and what I've seen just in the long period of time that I've been involved in the lacrosse world, is there still is just this struggle of acceptance for a lot of Native Americans within the game of lacrosse. The sport of lacrosse has evolved a lot from the late 1600s when it was first exposed to European settlers, and it has become a very expensive, very difficult sport to get into at certain levels, and with that comes a lot of homogeneity, I think, in the population that plays lacrosse today. And that struggle for acceptance for Native Americans, who really should be the most accepted amongst our game because they shared it with us. There is a lack of acceptance, I think, at certain levels, even going back as recently as 2020, when the World Lacrosse Committee started to move lacrosse towards the Olympics. The Onondaga Nation, the Iroquois Nation, the Haudenosaunee, they were originally left out of the the teams that would be competing in 2022 in the World Games, which is very backwards. Even at the highest level, the World Committee that governs our sport at the highest level, they were leaving out these Indigenous lacrosse players who really had been at the foundation and at the start of this game. So I think the acceptance piece is something that really needs to change as it relates to our sport.
And what advice do you give to people to, highlight these stories and uplift these voices?
I think the best thing that we can do is educate our young lacrosse players at an early age. Really making sure that they understand the history of the sport, the background, why it was played, how it was played, and making sure that it's a part of the sport. The education on its origins should be a part of our sport, so that we can play this game respectfully. We can be inclusive. This game is meant to be shared and shared with everybody. So education, I think, is the first kind of bit that we need to really emphasize, and especially in those younger years, so that by the time players are getting towards their high school, their college days, they have a real firm understanding and a real firm appreciation of where this amazing game came from.
And how do you plan on educating our team here about lacrosse as a sport and the history that it has to Native culture?
Absolutely. I think it's very unique. Women's lacrosse and men's lacrosse kind of had different paths to get to where they are today. Women's lacrosse, the first game was actually played in Scotland after the headmistress of a private school over in Scotland was able to come over to Canada and observe the game and thought it was one of the most beautiful things she had ever seen. So she brought it back. And then the first college in the United States to have a women's lacrosse team was Bryn Mawr. And it was a result of one of those students from the school over in Scotland moving to the United States and establishing a lacrosse program there. And so I think making sure that our players here, one, understand that lacrosse is a very special thing, and to help them appreciate that is giving them a little bit of these stories, these backgrounds about these pioneers of the game, both on the European side of things, yes, but then also on the Native American side of things, just making sure that they understand, again, it goes a little bit back to education, but also I think the respect portion of this is very, very big, respecting where the game came from, and respecting why the game came to be. So I think the education piece, even for players who are in college, is going to be the best thing that I can do as an individual, is making sure that our players take a little bit of time to do some research on their own, but then also presenting them with the facts of where this game came from, so that they can develop that appreciation and that understanding.
My name is Billy Nelson, and I'm an assistant track and cross country coach here at the University of Colorado.
And how long have you been here at CU?
I've been here as a coach since 2010, and I ran at CU from 2002 to 2008, so I've had connections to here for 20 years almost, yeah.
Whew, that's a long time.
Yeah, it's a long time.
Could you please just share a little bit about your background and your story?
Yeah, I mean, as far as my upbringing, I'm come from Central Southern California, and I came to CU to run the history of the program here, and when I was being recruited, I just kind of fell in love with the place and came here to run. And when I came here, I just kind of went on that path of wanting to be successful at the collegiate level, but then, as I kind of worked my way through the years I was here, I figured I could do it on a professional level. And after I graduated, I was able to run pro for another 8 years or so, 7 years. And but that also brought me into coaching as well too. So it kind of just was a full circle of just keeping the running side of things in my life as an athlete, but now as a coach. Yeah.
It is Native American Heritage Month. Could you please expand or tell us your story of how you connect to Indigenous culture?
Yeah, running was a huge part of that. And for me, I mean, just even growing up, I was always, as many families or many people around the United States have, there's Native blood in a lot of people, and whether how you look at that and how you view that is kind of perceived in a positive or negative light. And growing up, I was always drawn to Native culture, even at a young age. Throughout high school, it's something that I expanded my own knowledge on. Learn a little bit at the education that you had in high school, but very rarely do they dive deep into these stories. And so I was able to take it upon myself to learn more about Native communities around the country and the history that the Native Americans had on the U.S. history, but also just in general, kind of learning their story. When I got to college, I really kind of got focused on certain components of it. I was a history major here at CU, and then I switched to ethnic studies the last 2 years that I was here with the Native American focus. And again, just grasping more knowledge and hearing stories about, the history of Native cultures and wanting to expand my own knowledge on that brought me to changing my major to ethnic studies, and with the Native American focus, so I was able to work closely with campus professors and communities here. And then how running kind of intermixed with it was, my last year that I ran professionally, I was unsponsored, and there's a story about a Native American political prisoner named Leonard Peltier from the 70s, and he's been in prison since then. And there's a huge whole background story of leading into this shootout at Pine Ridge Reservation, and he was illegally they fled, and he was illegally extradited back to the United States and put through trial that was kind of a mockery of our judicial system and stuff. And there was a lot of scare tactics and stuff used to basically pinpoint certain crimes on this one gentleman. And I learned about that during my time at CU, FBI on Pine Ridge, and just learning about struggles that people think of Native American history and they want to go back to the Wild West, and this was in the 70s. And so I kind of grasped that story. And my last year of running, I was running unattached, and I really was looking for something to run for, something that I wanted to stay focused on but run for. And I was following Leonard's story many years, just up and down, learning more and kind of going by and learning more, and came across the Leonard Peltier Defense Committee, and they were looking for truck drivers to kind of talk to about bringing awareness to Leonard's story. And I wasn't a truck driver, but I was an unsponsored athlete, and I traveled all over the world and run at the U.S. championships, and I'd made the Olympic team in 2008, and so I was kind of high up in my event. And so I contacted them and said, I'm not a trucker, but I have this idea to wear Free Leonard Peltier on my jersey. And they loved it. They thought it was awesome. And they actually wrote to Leonard, the Defense Committee president, I guess. I'm not sure exactly what her title would be. She actually wrote to Leonard, and he was really excited about it, a new opportunity to bring awareness to his case and what was going on. And so I ran for Leonard for a year, and I was able to wear his jersey all through the United States. I ran in Tokyo that year. I wasn't allowed to wear the jersey in Tokyo, but just for litigation stuff. I don't think it really had to do with like standing up for anything. But I was able to travel with my warm-up shirts and stuff like that, and represent him on the world level as well too. Even raced in Sacramento, the state capital of California, and run at the U.S. championships there. One race early on in the year I won and posted the world's leading mark. It was early in the season, but it was captured on FlowTrack, which had a lot of viewers and a lot of subscriptions, and they actually announced that I was running for Leonard Peltier on camera. And when I came across the line, I never really popped my jersey. It's not my thing, but I did it, and it became a pretty big thing around our track and field community, which made me happy because it was bringing awareness to that. So that's kind of was my story with Leonard in there, and just preaching awareness. I was able to reach out to a lot of people who asked who he was, why I was running for him. And then through that, I met a lot of people in the Native community, and was able to talk to some high schools in South Dakota and make relationships, lifelong relationships with people. So that's kind of my story with my kind of contribution or ally, to the community for sure.
Many people don't know the challenges that Indigenous peoples face. Why do you think it was so important for you to use your platform to share his story? I
think just for that reason, a lot of Native communities and a lot of people that are on Leonard's side feel that he was used as kind of a patsy for it. Basically, he was high up in the American Indian movement, and a lot of people think that he was targeted to basically have the U.S. government put their thumb on a high up tribal member and just say we can control you from the inside in a sense. And so a lot of people think that he was targeted because during that court case in the whole process, people that were involved in the incident, they were let off on self-defense charges, and he wasn't allowed to use self-defense as a defense. And they changed locations of the court case, and they changed how they handled the juries and things like that. And it was just basically he was used as a way of just holding the community down. And he's seen as that by a lot of people that are connected to his story. And so for me, it was just it was a venue. I don't think a lot of people in the track and field world know about Leonard. A lot of people don't know about him at all. And so for me to say, hey, I'm going to use my platform for that was something that I was happy to just get it out there and educate people on what's going on. But it ties to a lot of things that are happening today as well too. Just misinformation or lack of information about what's going on in Native communities and the struggles they face.
What current challenges do Indigenous peoples face?
I think the big ones that Native communities face are treaty rights. I think there's a lot of, sovereignty is one that they deal with. I think, that those go back to, those are all historical components that they faced for years. I think, having access to media and sharing their stories and showing that they're still here and they're still, part of society and they're growing within their communities. I think a lot of Native communities face, the harm of erasure, of them just going away. I think there's a lot of communities in the United States that have lack of, water, clean water and proper nutrition. I think a big one is even like what we take advantage of on a regular basis is internet, broad speed internet. They don't have internet and, and the lack of education and growth with that as well too. So there's a lot of struggles that they face on reservations throughout. And then I think also the fear of leaving reservation to better themselves to come back. I think that they leave their home and then they kind of go out into the world and they deal with a lot of prejudice and stuff like that as well too, because people don't realize that they're still here and that they, people think of Native Americans and they really think of the Wild West, feathers and headdresses and things like that. And, our Department of Interior is Native woman and she's doing great things right now. And there's a lot of professional Natives out there. And I think people don't view them as that. They think that was the past and you're just here now. And I think that's just the education portion.
What advice could you give to allies on how to be a good ally?
I think, find something that you're interested in and learn about it, connect to communities and reach out. Don't be afraid to reach out. You have to come from a place of compassion. I don't really think it's a struggle, but I would say a struggle that I've had is wanting to be there and be an ally for communities without people thinking, it's just another majority group that's coming in to help out and save the day. And I think approaching it from a place of compassion and wanting to know and the knowledge component is huge. Not being afraid to reach out to communities and ask how you can help. One of my biggest kind of drawbacks for running for Leonard was I didn't want people to think I was doing it as all eyes on Billy, like he's doing this crazy thing. Like I didn't care at that, at that point in my career I'd accomplished quite a bit and it wasn't for me at all. And I think the right people knew the right message I was making. And so I think it's just, not being afraid to step out of your comfort zone and learn about something you're interested in and then reaching out to the communities that you want to be involved in and see what you can help. And now the day of social media and all that stuff with, live Instagram stuff and live Facebook stuff, you can really reach a huge target of an audience about it. That's what I've done over the last 5 or 6 years with Leonard's story is reach out to people that you can reach out all over the world via social media.
And what advice would you give to athletes on how to use their platform and be a social justice warrior like yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important, I think athletes can use their platform pretty easily, and do it the right way. I think the problem that athletes face, and anybody that faces when they try to step out of and use their platform is people just say, oh, you're just there to run, or you're just there to play basketball or something. But in reality, you're not. It's just a job that you have. And I think using that to step out and talk about things that actually matter, I think it's very important. I've always kind of used the model. There's a famous actor from 50s and into the 70s, Marlon Brando, who was a huge native rights activist, and he would not want to do interviews about movies. He was asked to do interviews all the time. He was, considered one of the greatest actors of all time, and he said, if you want to talk with me, I'll talk about movies I'm doing, but I want to talk about hard-hitting issues. And he used his platform really well and sat down and did interviews. And for me, that's what I did my last year too, is when people talked about my race or whatever, I'm wearing Free Leonard on my jersey and people are asking, and it's okay to use that platform in a correct way. Bringing awareness to injustices it's in our DNA.
My name is Shawn Harrison. I'm from Farmington, New Mexico. I grew up in an Navajo Nation. I grew up in New Mexico and Arizona, and I'm full Navajo, and my clans are Tobahe, Tachini, Totaglini, Oze Tachini.
And how long have you been here at CU?
I've been here since like 2019, the summer of that year. I mean, went to school just for a month and was really a good experience.
And it is Native American Heritage Month. Can you tell us about your Navajo culture?
Yeah, all I can say is that I grew up in the Navajo Nation with being traditional. My dad was always careful for me between my cultural and be myself. I mean, like my mom as well, too. I mean, she is very traditional, and from that standpoint, like growing up, I've seen my sister who has a ceremony when she turns from a girl to a woman. It's called Kenalta, and it's a story where we stay up all night and we have this medicine man who sings all night while she's up with them, and in the very early morning she would run to the west until she turns around, and we follow her back, and then we get prayers and ceremonies done because it's a blessing for a girl to turn into a woman. And for me myself, I've had many ceremonies such as being a Native American and trusting my beliefs in the Creator who brought us here in this world. And from that culture, in my standpoint, I believe that being a Native American is very awesome.
Last year you gave a dialogue on reservations to the athletic department and just educating everybody on what they mean and how they operate. Could you expand upon that a little bit for us today?
Well, yeah, I mean, like, being a Native American, there's a lot of things that's going on in the Navajo Nation. I mean, like, I've talked about my nonprofit that me and my friends has started. It's called Fundamental Needs. And with that being said, like, we're helping with people who are struggling with water and all the resources that they don't have. Because, like, from my inference, I've understand the perspective of a family that is struggling to drive out an hour to go out to get water or groceries, maybe 2 hours actually, because the Navajo Nation is very open. And from where I'm from, like I grew up in Arizona as well. I mean, the nearest gas station was 13 miles away, and for us to get gas and get groceries or just like drinks, we just had to go up there and drive back. And it was very hard because, just like money-wise as well. I mean, it's a place where I'm from that there was a uranium mine, and my grandpa worked for them, and he passed away from cancer. And so, like, I think that as of today, I think people who were working in mines are now trying to protect the Native Americans because, the spring water was affected down the mountain area, and there's this like sign where it says contaminated, and now I understand like how people are getting sick from the uranium, like the stuff and everything like that. And from that standpoint, like the nonprofit that we started is like basically to help all Native Americans out, and we're just being there for them.
How has your transition been leaving home and coming to see you?
Well, I mean, over my high school years, I've traveled a lot to, experience like different cultures and different vibes from people. I mean, like I've been out west, out east, and middle America. I don't know how you say it, but Midwest, yeah. And just seeing people's perspective and how they treat each other. Like I understand how the culture is, and from coming from here to from Mexico to here, I've understand like how like things were, and I missed my home a little bit, but having friends that makes you feel like you're part of a family is just very calm and open because you can talk to them whenever you want. And my parents are still back at home, and my family, home's home, but here I'm trying to make a example out of myself.
And can you talk just a little bit about your nonprofit, like when did it start and who'd you start it with?
Oh yeah, for sure. And okay, so the nonprofit that I started, it just started off as a conversation with me and my friend Justice Ramos, who was one of my partners, and his mom is the other partner as well. And started like in November of 2020, because like my friend Justice Ramos wanted to go into disaster relief, is that right? Mm-hmm. To work for them, but they couldn't because of COVID. And I was talking to him, and I said, I have a few people who started their own business that has like stories that begin from where they started, and I said I can get in contact with them to start a nonprofit, and from there, like around November, we're just coming up with names, and we came to a solution where it became fundamental needs, because, fundamental needs. And from there on, like, we finally got our nonprofit status around, because like January, February, and we started to get in contact with people to get grants, and we're working hard to talk to them and see how much funds we can raise to help the Native American people. And I did this project over June or July. This is where I helped this Native American family in delivering this big water tank and like about a lot of apple trees and a lot of wood, and building this like greenhouse for elementary school. It was a very fun experience, but it was really hot. But yeah.
And how can people help support your nonprofit?
Well, all I can say is to spread awareness of what we're doing, and how like people can talk to other people and care about each other. I mean, like that's my standpoint, because I care about people in a way that nobody knows, from my perspective, of how much I care about them. And from that standpoint, like, I feel like the nonprofit is like there to take care of the Native community, and such as other nonprofits that are helping us with helping Native Americans out.
And what advice would you give to a young Native runner who wants to be a collegiate runner one day?
Well, I've always made an example of myself. Since being well known back in Navajo Reservation, I've always said this, and I was never really of a brag or anything like that, because it would put a bad perspective on people who would look up to me. And like, for a Native American runner, like, I always wanted them to make an example of themselves, because of being the best that they can be, but showing an example of like how you can start from one point to another and end up where you're at. And I've known many people who were looking up to me, and I like motivate them for a reason, because just spreading the word and opening opportunities and going from high school to college is a really fun experience, and that experience is the best.
Representation matters, and I just want to tell you, you're doing amazing.
Yeah, thank you.